In a quiet village surrounded by dry hills and broken trees, a girl named Amina walked barefoot across the dusty ground. She was only 19, but her eyes looked older. They had seen too much pain, too much loss. The sound of birds had been replaced by gunfire, and the sweet songs of morning had turned into cries of fear. Amina lived in a small tent near the army camp. She was not a soldier. She was not trained to fight. She cooked food for the soldiers, washed their clothes, cleaned their wounds, and sometimes she helped bury the dead. She did what she could quietly without asking for thanks. Most soldiers didn't notice her. To them, she was just the girl who brought warm rice and tea after long battles. But inside, Amina burned a fire she never showed. The war had taken her parents when she was only 14. She remembered hiding under the wooden bed as men with guns kicked open the door. Her mother screamed. Her father tried to protect them. In seconds, her world was gone. Since that day, she had lived with one purpose: to survive and maybe one day to matter. Her brother Karim had taken a different path. He joined the rebels and disappeared into the mountains. She hadn't heard from him in years. Some say he was dead. Others said he became a commander. But Amina stayed behind in the village. She didn't want revenge. She wanted peace. Yet peace never came. Every day she watched soldiers train with heavy boots and louder voices. She studied how they moved, how they aimed, how they made decisions. She noticed things others missed, like which soldier's hand trembled before firing, or which commander looked brave only when watched. She didn't speak of it, but she remembered it all. Then one evening, everything changed. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in red and orange. The camp was quiet, and Amina was serving bread to a few soldiers near the fire. Suddenly a sound cracked through the air, not one, but many gunfire, close and sharp. Shouts followed, and then the ground shook as an explosion hit the outer fence. The camp was under attack. Panic spread like fire. Some soldiers grabbed their rifles, others searched for cover. Amina froze for a second, her heart pounding. But instead of running, she moved. She ran towards the medical tent where injured men were crying out. She wrapped wounds, gave water, and helped drag one man to safety. In the middle of the chaos, a young soldier rushed by her, blood on his shirt, fear in his eyes. He was holding a rifle but dropped it as he fell. Amina grabbed the gun to help him up. That's when she noticed the rifle was broken, the barrel cracked, useless. The boy looked at her and whispered, I can't fight," then passed out. Now Amina stood alone, holding a broken weapon in a battlefield she was never trained for. The others yelled, told her to stay down, but she didn't listen. She looked around. The attackers were coming from the ridge above, hidden by rocks and smoke. No one had seen them yet. She raised the broken rifle and pointed it towards the ridge, not to shoot, but to distract. The enemy thought she had a working gun. They ducked, hesitated, and paused their advance. That moment gave the captain time to regroup the soldiers and turn the defense around. Amina stayed standing in the open, still holding the useless gun. Not a bullet in the chamber, but bravery in her eyes. When the fight ended and the dust cleared, they found her still there, her clothes covered in dirt, her hands shaking but her head held high. One soldier whispered, "She's just a girl," another said, "No, she's something else." That night Amina didn't sleep. She sat by the fire alone, looking at the stars. The war had taken everything from her, but maybe, just maybe, she had taken something back. Respect, courage, and the beginning of a new story. Not one of survival, but of strength. And so began the legend of the girl who held a broken rifle and stood taller than anyone expected. The morning sky was soft and golden, the kind of morning that made the world look peaceful. But Amina knew better. She had learned that silence in war was never peace. It was only the pause before something broke again, years before she stood in the army camp. Amina was just a girl with big dreams. She wanted to be a teacher, to fill small notebooks with poems and stories. Her father owned a tiny shop at the edge of the village. He sold rice flour and sometimes candies for children. Her mother sang while cooking, her voice gentle like the wind after rain, and her older brother Karim would always tease her for reading too much. He used to say, "The world outside our village isn't made of stories. Amina, it's made of struggle." But she laughed and said, Then I'll turn the struggle into a story too. Those days were soft, warm and full of color, the scent of baked bread, the sound of goats in the fields, the laughter of children chasing kites. No one thought war would ever reach their quiet home. No one thought darkness could come so fast. It happened on a night filled with thunder. Amina was 13, sitting by a candle. Writing in her small diary, her mother was praying, and her father was locking the shop doors. Then came the sound, a long, terrifying roar of trucks, the kind that made the earth tremble. Men with guns entered the village, their faces covered, their shouts wild and cruel. They went door to door, breaking, burning, searching for enemies. But there were none, only families, only fear. Amina's father pushed her and her mother into the small cellar under the floor. "Stay quiet, whatever happens, don't come out," he whispered. Then he went outside. The sound of shouting grew louder. Amina clutched her mother's arm, tears already running down her face. Then came the gunshots, one after another, and everything went silent when the men left. Amina crawled out of the cellar, smoke filled the air, and the smell of fire choked her throat. Her father's shop was gone, her house half burned, and her father's body lay in the dust, still and quiet. Her mother screamed until her voice broke. And that night, Amina's childhood ended. Days later, her brother Karim disappeared. He had taken one of their father's old rifles and joined a rebel group. Amina begged him not to go, but he didn't listen. "Someone has to fight back," he said. "We can't just hide and cry." He left with a promise to return, but he never did. Amina and her mother stayed behind, moving from place to place everywhere they went. War followed. Food became scarce and hope became smaller every day. Then came another night darker than all before. Amina and her mother were hiding near the old school building when shells began to fall. One hit close, throwing dust and fire into the air. When Amina woke, everything was red, her ears ringing. Her mother's hand was still in hers, but she wasn't moving. Amina screamed, but the sky swallowed her voice. By dawn, she was alone for 2 days. She walked barefoot through fields of ash and silence. She found no one, only ruins and memories. Finally, she reached a refugee camp near the border there. Soldiers took her in, and not because they needed her, but because they pitied her. They gave her food, a tent, and a name tag. But Amina didn't want pity, she wanted purpose. She started helping the nurses, cleaning wounds, carrying water, feeding the injured. Every day she worked until her hands bled, and little by little, the camp began to see her not as a helpless girl, but as a helper. Her kindness brought light where there was none, yet deep inside, she carried something heavier than pain, the memory of that night. The screams, the smoke, the broken rifle her brother took, it all lived inside her like a shadow she could never escape. One evening, she sat by the fire watching the soldiers clean their weapons. One of them looked up and said, "You're brave, girl. But bravery doesn't save lives, guns do." Amina smiled softly and whispered, "Maybe, but courage saves hearts," he laughed. But years later, he would remember those words, because courage was all she ever needed. That was the day everything truly changed. Not when her home burned, not when she lost her family, but when she decided she would no longer be a victim. From that day she became something else, a quiet storm. A girl with nothing left to lose and everything left to give. Her journey was far from over. The war would soon test her in ways she could never imagine. And one day a broken rifle would once again fall into her hands. Only this time she would not tremble, she would rise. The camp was always busy during the day, voices shouting, boots marching, trucks rumbling in and out. But at night it changed. The noise softened, the fire cracked gently, and the real voices began. The whispers. Amina slept in a small tent near the supply shed. Her blanket was thin and the cold often kept her awake. But it wasn't just the wind or the chill that stole her sleep. It was the stories, the secrets, the whispers she heard all around her. People didn't notice her much, so they spoke freely near her. She wasn't part of their war, not officially. But she was always listening, always learning. One evening, as she washed blood from a soldier's uniform, she overheard 2 young men talking nearby. "That girl's strange," one said. "She never cries. Never speaks unless needed." "She saw too much," the other replied. Some say she walked alone through fire. Amina paused, her hands frozen in the water. She had heard things like this before. They spoke about her like she was a ghost. Not real, just a story passed around the fire. Some respected her, some feared her, and others just wanted her gone. Captain Rahim was one of the few who looked at her differently. He was tall, quiet, and carried a deep scar down his cheek. A man who didn't waste words. He noticed how Amina moved, slow but sure. How she never ran from screams. How her eyes always searched the horizon like she knew something the others didn't. One afternoon he called her to the supply truck. "You've been watching us," he said. Not as a question but a fact. Amina nodded, not sure what to say. "Do you know how to use a rifle?" "No," she replied, "but I know how to fix a broken one." Rahim raised an eyebrow, a rare smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The next day, she found herself standing near the shooting range. Not to shoot but to observe. She watched how each soldier aimed, how they breathed before pulling the trigger. She noticed the small things, the twitch of a nervous hand, the delay of someone who was afraid. In her mind she drew maps, not of roads but of people. She learned who could be trusted in danger, who would break and who would hide at night. She sat with the wounded. She listened to them talk in their sleep, names, regrets, prayers whispered to mothers or forgotten lovers. Each voice added a new thread to the web she was quietly weaving. She was no spy, no soldier, but something was forming inside her. Something sharp, something calm. Then one evening, a boy named Faisal came limping into the tent. He was barely 18, new to the camp. His leg was cut badly and his face pale from blood loss. Amina wrapped his wound gently, her hands practiced now. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You don't belong in war." Amina looked at him, her eyes deep and steady. "I didn't come to fight," she said. "But the war came to me anyway." Whispers continued to follow her like shadows. "She knows things," someone whispered. "She warned the medics before the last blast. Said she heard trucks. Maybe she has a brother with the rebels," another said. "She's just a lucky girl," someone else muttered. But Amina didn't care what they said. She was preparing for something even if she didn't know what. Every moment she spent observing, every injury she treated, every cry she answered. It was all part of her becoming. Captain Rahim kept watching too. He once saw her disassemble a jammed rifle faster than 2 trained soldiers. Another time, she directed the medics during an emergency better than the lieutenant. And still, she never asked for rank, never asked to wear the uniform. She wore silence like armor, and in silence, she was becoming stronger than any of them realized. But the camp was not a safe place for long. Enemy movement was increasing. Roads were becoming more dangerous. One night, a soldier returned to the camp covered in dust and panic. "They're planning something," he said. "A full strike. Maybe by next week." The officers gathered, planning defense and escape. But in the corner of the room, Amina stood by the window listening. She looked at the map on the table and shook her head. "They won't come from the road," she said quietly. "They'll come from the river." The room fell silent. "What makes you think that?" the general asked sharply. Amina stepped forward, her voice calm. "Because that's what I would do." That night, she was no longer a whisper. She became a voice they could not ignore. The girl they once overlooked was now seen. And war, which once tried to destroy her, had unknowingly trained her. The sun had not yet risen. The camp was quiet, almost too quiet. Only the soft sound of boots on gravel and the low hum of radio static broke the silence. Something was coming. Amina felt it in the wind. That strange stillness before a storm. That breath the world takes before it screams. She walked past the sleeping tents with a jug of water in her hand. But her eyes were not on the path. They were fixed on the hills in the distance. Her heart beat slower, deeper, as if preparing for something it already knew. Captain Rahim stood near the watchpost, binoculars in hand. When Amina approached, he nodded. "You still believe they'll come from the river?" he asked. She didn't hesitate. "They know we're watching the road," she said. "The river is hidden, quiet. It's where I'd go." He didn't argue. He had learned by now. Amina's instincts were rarely wrong. Hours passed and the sky turned gray. Then came the call, short and sharp. Movement near the eastern riverbank, a soldier yelled from the tower. Sirens blared through the camp. Men rushed to grab rifles, helmets, vests. Trucks moved into position. Sandbags were thrown into piles, and Amina, once just the girl with the water jug, found herself standing in the middle of the war she had predicted. The fighting started fast. Gunfire echoed through the hills. Smoke rose from the edge of the camp. The enemy had come prepared, quick and brutal. Soldiers fell, some wounded, some gone forever. Amina didn't run. She moved through the camp like she had always done. Fast, quiet, focused, helping the injured, guiding the medics, pulling supplies. Then she saw him. Faisal, the young soldier she once bandaged. He was pinned behind a metal barrel, his leg bleeding again. Without thinking, Amina ran to him. A bullet zipped past her shoulder. But she didn't stop. She grabbed his arm, pulled him behind cover. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "Take this," he said, pushing a rifle into her hands. Then he collapsed, unconscious. Amina looked at the weapon. It was heavy, cold, and old. She checked the chamber. Jammed. The barrel was cracked near the end. It wouldn't fire. It was useless. But she didn't throw it away. She held it tighter, as if it still meant something. And then she looked toward the enemy line. They were moving through the smoke. Slowly, watching for targets. Amina had no bullets. No training, only a broken rifle, but sometimes, even broken things can be powerful. She climbed up a half-burned truck and stood tall, the cracked weapon in her hands. She pointed it toward the enemy. From a distance, it looked like any other soldier taking position. She didn't move, didn't blink, and for a moment the enemy paused. Snipers spotted her and held their fire, thinking she had them in sight. They crouched, changed direction, slowed their advance. That hesitation gave the captain the time he needed. Rahim signaled his team to flank from the west. A blast followed, this time from the soldiers' side. The enemy was pushed back, surprised, off balance. 1 minute turned the tide, and Amina had given them that minute. When the dust began to settle, the camp was half destroyed. Smoke rose from the tents, wounded men cried out. Medics ran in all directions. But the enemy had retreated, the line held, and on top of the truck stood Amina, still holding the broken rifle. Her hands were black with soot. Her hair wild from the wind, but her eyes were calm, like she had known all along how this would end. Captain Rahim approached her. He looked at the rifle, then at her. "You knew it was broken," he said. Amina nodded. "Then why stand there?" She shrugged. "Sometimes fear doesn't need bullets." He stared at her, a strange look in his eyes, part respect, part disbelief. "A broken rifle in the hands of the right person is more dangerous than a loaded one in the hands of a coward," he said, almost to himself that night, as the soldiers repaired their camp and buried their dead. Whispers rose once again, but this time they were different. Not words of doubt or mockery, but words of awe. She stood with a broken rifle. She faced snipers without blinking. She turned the tide with no bullets. Amina sat near the fire, the broken gun beside her. She didn't speak much, she never did. But in every corner of the camp, her silence now spoke louder than words. She was no longer just a helper, no longer just a girl from a lost village. She was something else now, a symbol, a story. And the war had just learned a powerful lesson. Not every weapon is made of metal. Some are made of will. The camp was quiet again, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the kind of silence that came after something big, like the stillness of a heart right after it stops beating. Amina sat near the broken rifle. She hadn't let anyone touch it since the ambush. It was not just a weapon anymore. It had become a piece of her story. A story no one could ignore now. Soldiers passed her with nods of respect. Even the loud ones who once laughed at her fell silent when she walked by. But Amina didn't want attention. She didn't want medals or words. She wanted to stop what was coming next. She had heard things, small pieces of conversation. Talk of another attack, this one bigger, better planned. The enemy was angry after being pushed back, and now they wanted revenge. The officers in the camp were planning defense. More guns, more guards, more sandbags, but Amina knew it wasn't enough. The enemy wouldn't strike the same way twice. They would change direction, change speed, change shape, and if the camp only looked in one direction, they would be blind to the danger. So Amina began her silent plan. She didn't tell anyone. Not yet. They still didn't fully trust her even now. After what she did with the broken rifle, they saw her bravery, yes, but they didn't see her mind. She started by walking the outer edges of the camp every evening. She watched how the guards moved. Which ones were lazy, which ones were tired. She noticed a weak point near the back fence, a spot where bushes covered the view and the ground dipped low. If she were the enemy, that's where she would come. She also listened to the soldiers' complaints. Most didn't know what they were revealing, one said. The cameras haven't worked since last month, another joked. If they attacked from the east, we'd never see them. Amina said nothing. But in her notebook she drew lines, not lines of roads or rivers, lines of weakness, cracks in their walls. She visited the medic tent daily, not just to help, but to check supplies. They were running low on bandages. Bullets were fewer too. No one had counted them properly. No one expected another attack so soon. That night, Amina stayed awake under the stars. The sky above looked peaceful, but her mind was busy. She wasn't afraid of fighting. She was afraid of the camp falling apart before it even began. So she walked to Captain Rahim's tent. She didn't knock, just stood there until he noticed her. He looked up from his maps, surprised. "You should be resting," he said. "I need to talk," she replied. He listened as she laid out her plan. Her eyes sharp, voice low, words steady. She spoke of the blind spots, the lazy guards, the broken cameras, the low supplies. She spoke of the enemy's patterns, their silence, and what it meant. And then she gave him a map, drawn by her own hands, marking every place where they were vulnerable, every place she would attack if she were on the other side. Rahim didn't speak for a long time, then he leaned back and looked at her. "You've been doing our job for us," he said softly. "I've been surviving," she answered. He handed her a new map, this one with access codes and patrol rotations. "Build your plan," he said, "and I'll back it." That night, Amina became more than just a helper. She became a strategist. She moved quietly, spoke only when needed, but every step she took was part of her silent plan. She trained a few soldiers in quiet drills, taught them how to watch, how to listen. She showed them how to track footprints in the mud, how to set tripwires without sound. Some laughed at first, but when Captain Rahim supported her, they followed every night. She walked past the broken rifle, still resting by the fire. It reminded her that weapons didn't always need bullets. Sometimes they just needed belief. In 3 days, the camp looked different. The blind spots were guarded, the weak fences reinforced. The quiet paths were covered with traps, and in the center of it all stood Amina. No stripes on her arm, no title beside her name, but a leader in every way. Still, she told no one her full plan, because her final move wasn't written on any paper. It was inside her, waiting. If the enemy returned, she would be ready. Not just with courage, but with control. Not just with a rifle, but with a mind sharper than any blade. And when the time came, the world would no longer whisper her name. It would remember it. The night arrived without stars. Thick clouds covered the sky like a dark curtain. The wind carried no song, no peace. Only the smell of metal and smoke in the air. Amina stood near the supply tent. Her eyes fixed on the eastern hills. She didn't blink, didn't speak. She was waiting, not for the enemy, but for the moment she had prepared for. Captain Rahim stood beside her. He held a radio in one hand, a pistol in the other. He looked at Amina and nodded once. "She said they'd come tonight," he whispered to himself. And she did, not because of a feeling, but because she understood the enemy now. She knew how they moved, how they waited, how they hunted. Then it began. A flash of light from the trees, a sharp whistle in the wind, then the ground shook. The first explosion hit the southern gate. It was a distraction. The real attack came from the river, just like before, but this time Amina was ready. Her silent plan moved into motion. Soldiers rushed to their new positions. Tripwires snapped, flares flew into the sky. The camp lit up like a storm had broken inside it. But there was no panic, there was only action. Amina didn't run to hide. She ran toward the back fence. That was the weakest point before, now it was her trap. She ducked behind a barrel, her breath steady. She watched shadowy figures crawling through the tall grass. One step forward, another, then a small explosion. A scream, then silence one by one. The enemy fell into the trap she had designed, not from bullets, but from the quiet knowledge of someone who had watched every corner of this land. Near the medical tent, she saw Faisal again, wounded, but holding a radio calling for backup. Amina helped him lean against the wall. "You planned this," he gasped. She nodded. "I just used what they gave me," she said. Silence, time, and shadows. The fighting continued for hours. The enemy tried again and again, but every step they took had been seen already. Every corner they turned had been marked. By sunrise, the gunfire stopped. Only the sound of birds slowly returning filled the air. The camp was quiet again, but this time the silence wasn't fear. It was victory. Bodies were carried away. The wounded were treated, the smoke began to fade, and Amina stood in the center of it all. Her hands covered in dust and sweat, she didn't speak. She only looked up at the sky as it finally cleared. Captain Rahim walked toward her. His jacket torn, his face lined with exhaustion. "You saved this place," he said. Amina didn't reply. She was thinking of everyone they couldn't save. Of those who had fallen while she was still learning. Still planning, but Rahim wasn't done. "You didn't just survive," he said. "You outsmarted them. Around the camp." Whispers started again, but now they weren't about her past. They weren't questions or doubts, they were stories. She led the traps. She stopped them with no rank. She fought without firing a bullet. Faisal smiled as she walked past him. "You're more than a soldier now," he said. Amina looked at him and shook her head gently. "I'm still just the girl who lost her home," she said. "But now I know how to protect what's left." Later that day, a meeting was called. The high-ranking officers sat at a table covered in maps and coffee cups. They asked her to speak for the first time. They listened, truly listened. She told them everything. Not just how the enemy attacked, but how the camp had failed before. How small weaknesses became big disasters. And how quiet planning saved more lives than shouting ever could. One general leaned forward and said, "You think like a commander." She didn't answer. She wasn't looking for power. She was looking for peace. When the meeting ended, Captain Rahim handed her something wrapped in cloth. She opened it slowly. Inside was the same broken rifle, cleaned, polished, still cracked. "This belongs to you now," he said. "It saved more lives than any weapon here." That night, Amina sat by the fire with the rifle beside her. The camp slept, tired but safe. She watched the flames rise and fall. She thought of her father, her mother, her brother, and the girl she used to be. The dust had settled. The wounds would heal. But something inside her had changed forever. She was no longer in the shadow of war. She was now standing in its center, not as a victim but as a quiet warrior. A week passed since the battle. The air in the camp felt different now. Not lighter, not exactly safe, but calmer. Like the land had taken a deep breath and was waiting to exhale. Amina walked slowly past the tents. Children from nearby villages had come to the camp with their families. They clung to their mothers, eyes wide, watching everything. Some of them looked at Amina with curiosity. One little girl even followed her around. Not because Amina smiled or played, but because she moved like someone who had lived through fire and still stood tall. In the distance, trucks came and went, bringing more soldiers, more weapons, and more decisions. The camp was no longer just a resting place. It had become a center, a point of strategy, and now Amina had become something more too. Captain Rahim called her into his tent that morning. He looked more serious than usual. There was a paper on the table, and a pair of new boots on the ground. "This is for you," he said, sliding the paper toward her. She picked it up, unsure what she was holding. It was an official letter from the regional command. They were offering her a role, a permanent one, tactical advisor. Amina stared at the words without speaking. "You deserve this," Rahim said. "You've done more than any trained officer in this unit." She didn't answer. Not yet. Her hands held the paper, but her mind held something heavier. After she left the tent, she walked to her usual place by the fire. The broken rifle was still there. Cleaned but still cracked, a reminder of what she had done, and who she used to be. She sat in silence. Watching the flames dance, the same little girl from earlier approached her again. "Are you a commander now?" the child asked. Amina smiled gently. "Maybe," she replied. "But I didn't ask to be." That night, the camp gathered around the fire, not to plan or to fight, but to remember. Names of those lost were read out loud, and for every name, a soldier placed a stone beside the flag. When it was Amina's turn to place her stone, she stood still for a long time. Then she whispered her brother's name, Karim. No one had seen him. No one knew where he had gone, but in her heart, she still carried him, and tonight, she honored him too. Later, as the fire burned low, she sat with Captain Rahim again. "I don't know if I should accept," she said softly. "Why not?" he asked, surprised. "You've already led us without the title." Amina looked into the flames. "I didn't come here to lead," she said. "I came to survive." Rahim leaned forward. "And now?" She closed her eyes for a moment. "Now I want more than survival," she whispered. "I want change," but she was afraid, not of danger, not of battle. She was afraid of losing the part of herself that still remembered her mother's songs, her father's laughter, her dreams of being a teacher. Would this new title turn her into just another name in a war file? The next morning, she stood on the hill just outside the camp. From there, she could see the wide river, the ruined village far beyond, and the rising sun. She thought of everything the war had taken from her, and everything she had built in return. Below her, the camp moved like a living machine. But some of it, the discipline, the protection, the plans, and were things she had shaped. Without orders, without armor, without even a working weapon, she heard footsteps behind her. It was Faisal, still limping, but stronger now. "Are you going to accept it?" he asked. "I don't know," she replied. He looked out at the horizon and said, "My little sister lives in a village 2 valleys from here. She wants to be a teacher too. She used to dream like you did." Amina turned to him, surprised. "Then go protect her," he said. "But not with a gun, with a map. With a mind like yours." That was the moment, that was when the fear fell away. She realized accepting the title didn't mean losing herself. It meant using what she had become. It meant becoming the protector she had always needed. Not just for herself, but for others. So that night, she walked back into Captain Rahim's tent. She placed the cracked rifle gently on his desk. "I'm ready," she said. He looked at her, eyes soft. "Then it's official," he replied. The boots were handed to her, new, strong, and heavy. But as she slipped them on, they felt just right. She didn't feel small anymore. She didn't feel broken. She felt chosen. The wind moved gently across the valley. It carried no smoke, no fear. No sound of bullets, only the whisper of leaves, the soft cries of birds, and the steady breath of peace trying to return. Amina stood at the edge of a small hill, the same hill where her story had changed many times. First as a lost girl, then as a helper, then as a quiet fighter. Now, she stood as something else, something stronger. A leader born not from training, but from survival, pain, and purpose. The new boots on her feet still felt strange. Heavier than what she was used to, but solid. They didn't just carry her weight. They carried the weight of those who had trusted her, followed her, and believed in her. She looked down at the camp below. It had grown, more tents, more people, but also more hope. A school tent had been built for children. Not far from the medical station, Amina visited it every morning. She would sit with the children and tell stories, not of war, but of courage. The little girl who once followed her around now called her Teacher Amina. And even though Amina never got to finish school herself, she became a teacher in the way that mattered most, by showing others how to live, how to survive, and how to stand again after falling. Faisal was still there too. His limp had lessened, and his smile had returned. He had begun helping train the new recruits, but every evening, he sat near the fire and carved wood for the children, small animals, tiny birds, and once, and a cracked rifle, he gave that one to Amina, who held it in her hands without a word. Captain Rahim had been moved to a higher command post. Before leaving, he called Amina into his tent one last time. He placed a badge in her hand, not flashy, not gold, Just a small symbol shaped like a flame. "This is what you are," he said. "A spark in the dark." Amina didn't need awards, but that badge stayed close to her heart, pinned inside her old scarf, the one she wore since the first battle. The war outside was not over. Fighting still happened in the far hills, but the camp became a place of healing. People came not just for safety, but for training, for guidance. They came to learn from the girl with the broken rifle. Amina never called herself a commander. Others did. She still walked among the people. Not above them, she still washed her own clothes and helped carry water. But when it came time to plan, to protect, to prepare, they looked to her, and she never turned away. One evening, a stranger came to the camp. He wore a long coat, a scarf over his face. His hands were scarred, his eyes tired. Amina looked at him and her heart stopped. It was Karim, her brother. He had come home, not because he had won, but because he was done with fighting. He had heard of a girl leading from the front, a girl who turned a broken weapon into a shield for many. He didn't believe it at first, but when he saw her face, he dropped his bag and fell to his knees. Amina rushed to him. She knelt down, tears falling without control. After all the years, all the pain, her family was not lost completely. Two pieces had found each other again. Karim stayed in the camp. Quietly working in the gardens, he said little. But every day he watched his sister lead. He told her once, "I left to fight for revenge." "You stayed and fought for something bigger," Amina only replied. "We both lost, but maybe now we can help others win." Seasons passed. Rain washed away the ash, children grew stronger, new roads opened, and stories of the camp traveled far. Stories of a young girl who changed everything without ever raising her voice. A girl who stood still with a broken rifle and made the world pause. One day, a reporter came to ask her name, to write about her, to take pictures. But Amina refused to stand alone in any photo. She said, "If you tell my story, include every hand that helped me, because no one survives alone." And so, her story became legend, not of war, but of quiet strength. Not of glory, but of guidance, not of bullets, but of bravery. Amina had once been a forgotten girl. Now, she was the voice behind hundreds. The shield for the weak, the fire in the dark. And when people spoke of her, they didn't just say she survived the war. They said she changed the meaning of it.